Today's topic is harmonics and harmonic processors. And this is a really beefy topic. I mean, you can get lost in this really quickly, and I'm not going to make any guarantees. This might end up being a really long session here because I got a lot of stuff to cover and a lot of stuff to show you. But I think this one's really important in terms of understanding what this kind of information does to your signal. And please keep in mind, again, I'm going to constantly remind you of this. I'm always going to come at it from the perspective of music, right? How do these things impact music? Because, that's where the whole discussion of, quote unquote, what sounds better, digital or analog, it's all based in music, right? We all make that a judgment based on music. So um, that's where we're going to kind of the dividing line between analog and digital comes a lot of times is in the harmonic content that is in the signal path. So we're going to talk about that today. And I'm sorry I'm a little froggy today. Just going to have to deal with it, I think. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is audio warmth, because that's always the thing, right? Everybody's saying, well, analog sounds warmer than digital. Well, what the hell is warmth? What does warm sound like, right? I mean, how do we actually describe that and put it into some sort of form where we can understand it? And I had it explained to me in a really, really elegant way from a gentleman named Jürgen Wall, who used to work for Neumann, as well as Yuri and a bunch of other. I mean, he is so deeply immersed in tube design and circuit design. He's just a genius guy. And when I was endorsing for Neumann, we did some seminars together. So, I had a chance to ask him this question. Okay, Jürgen, how do you describe what warmth is? And it is really all about the harmonic content that is generated by a piece of gear in the signal. But in terms of overall analog quality, there's more to it than that. So let's just start to examine this a little bit. In analog circuitry, all of these things contribute to what we would call an analog quality, an analog sound, right? Certainly a preamp, summing amps, tube and solid state circuits. These all contribute to it, right? And if there's one kind of central theme I want to get across to you today, it's this. And especially in the context of digital consoles, is that trying to get something to sound analog, to have an analog character, is not a one-trick pony. Meaning you can't just do one thing and expect it to be a realistic analog emulation, right? Analog is a summation of a whole bunch of little parts and pieces of analog that give it this quality that we kind of know about so well, right? So in terms of what contributes, certainly preamps, summing amps, tube, and solid state circuits contribute to it. And each of these kind of things can present their own style of harmonics, right? Odd order harmonics, which can be kind of gritty, edgy, kind of, honestly, many times kind of aggressive sounding, kind of ugly sounding at times, but you can use that to your advantage for sure. Even order harmonics are the ones that are very musically sympathetic. They're smooth, they're bright, they're big, they're fat, right? And we see typically a lot of even order harmonics out of tube circuitry and odd order harmonics out of solid state circuitry. It's not an absolute, but way, way more often than not, that is what the circuit can present once it starts to saturate, okay? And that's why we have a tendency to think that tube circuits sound more musical. And it has to do with the harmonics that they present. They're much more musical, and we're going to go into depth on this here in just a second. But other things that contribute to analog quality are transformers and inductors, right? All of those kind of things contribute to an analog quality. And then finally, magnetic tape recording, right? Now, this is the oddball for us live sound guys, right? We never got to experience what tape compression sounded like in our live mixes until digital came along, right? Guys, if you haven't muted your mics, please mute your mics. All right, there we go. All right, so, magnetic tape, and I'll tell you something, and I'll share a little story with you. This was always the thing, and it came to me very, very late in my live sound work. I kind of come from the studio, kind of got my start in the studio, and it was certainly all analog at that point. And so, you kind of get lulled to sleep with what magnetic tape, with analog tape is doing to your sound. And once I got into live sound, I remember thinking, well, yeah, I mean, I can get things sounding good here, but you know, it was always like this little quest of kind of going, oh, wait a minute, what's kind of missing here, you know? And until we got to digital and I started putting in tape emulation in, the light bulb came on. It was like, of course, it's the tape compression that's missing in live sound. You know, if we're trying to compare it to sound that we know, analog sound that we know. All right. So my point out of all of this is getting a believable analog quality to your mixes and to your inputs is a combination of all of these things. It's little bits of all of it. It's not just one thing. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a digital console. How much of this do you have available to you in a digital console, right? Very little. I mean, the preamp is really the only piece of true analog circuitry in the console, right? Certainly the only place you're ever going to be able to get any harmonic information. You know, you don't have summing amps. We don't have tube or solid state circuit paths in the console. It's the preamp, and then it's all digital after that, which is no more harmonic enhancement unless you make it come into there in some way with an emulation, okay? So, you know, this whole, I kind of take issue when I hear of this, people say, well, I want my digital console to sound like my analog console. It's never going to sound like your analog console. Let's dispel the myth now. It's never going to sound like it. Matter of fact, digital was designed specifically to not sound like analog consoles. It was designed to take out distortion, take out harmonic distortion, take out noise, all of those things. And once it was all gone, I think that's when we kind of realized, especially in the context of music, is like, hey, wait a minute now. We might need some of that stuff in here. Okay, so let's talk about that today. All right, let's carry on here. So, you know, as you can tell, and it's always a struggle to talk about this, about how we talk about distortion, because that's what we're talking about adding to our signal here to give it an analog quality is distortion, believe it or not, guys. So I love this quote by Hugh Robjohns. It's just hilarious. I think it's absolutely spot on too. Describing distortion with words is like describing flavors of cheese through the medium of dance, meaning there's just no way to really do it, right? I mean, there's no way to do it. But the other thing that comes with it is this concept. And, you know, if you've worked in analog recording to any time, you totally understand this concept, and even digital recording to a degree. And I'm going to read it so I can emphasize certain pieces of it. As well as the direct influence this equipment had on the sound, it will have also influenced recording and mix decisions, meaning the sound that is being produced by this analog piece of whatever is actually influencing how you react to it downstream, right? Such as mic selection with brighter sounding condenser mics being chosen, for example, or high frequency EQ boost being applied with the knowledge that top end emphasis and transients would be smoothed by the, and I'm going to put in quotations, analog recording chain, right? And I can think back to many times in the studio recording analog, you know, where there was always this emphasis in analog recording of, let's make sure we're printing bright enough. Let's make sure we're printing bright enough because we don't want to have to boost high frequency, especially upper high frequency on the return path, because we're going to bring in all the tape noise, right? And honestly, kind of the opposite is kind of true in digital recording, right? Where you want to make sure things are harmonic enough. You want to make sure things are fat enough before you print them. You don't want to necessarily boost a lot of high frequency to the recording mechanism because it's going to eat up all the bit depth. All that transient response is going to eat up the bit depth, right? So the gear is helping us. It's kind of driving us to make choices there, right? All right, so again, let's just kind of go through just the common terms that we're going to be dealing with a bunch here today. Tube saturation typically presents even order harmonic distortion, okay? Solid state saturation, typically odd order harmonic distortion. And tape saturation, it can be either or both, but it also adds an element of compression to it as well, all right? So these are the three main types of things that we're thinking about that we might want to add to our signals and our mixes to get them to sound a specific way. And I will tell you, I know it's going to sound convenient because I work for the digital console manufacturer, but I'm on record as saying this, and I absolutely believe this. With digital, I can make something sound more analog than analog because I have so much more control over it. You know, if you understand it and can do it in the right order and do it in the right way, you can make very believable analog signal chains happen on a digital console. Okay. So let's take a look at this from the musical perspective, though, because this is the important piece of it. And we have to be. As I think back on history, I always kind of wonder. I wonder if it's the orchestral recording guys that were the main pushers of. I don't want to say getting rid of analog, but saying, okay, surely we can do better than this. We don't want all this harmonic information and this distortion on there. We want this to be as purely representative of the source as we possibly can. I don't know that for a fact, but I always speculate on that. And I think it has to do with this kind of musical discussion here. All right, so obviously you see the musical scale here, and we got a frequency representation of all these notes that are in there. All right, so let's just start with a simple A, right? A simple A. We're going to go A440. And obviously, the first harmonic, or the second harmonic of that, the first harmonic is considered the fundamental. The second harmonic is 880 hertz. That's an octave above, right? And then we go another 404, or another, oh, did I do that wrong? No, another harmonic above that is the fourth at 1760. And these are all the even order harmonics, right? This is the E at just under 3,000 there. You can do the math if you want to get it there. But look at the third, right? Look at the third harmonic there. It's actually not really a great mathematical representation of it. It's not exactly 880 plus 440, right? So this is where we start to run into some problems with it, and it starts to be why these odd harmonics are a problem. Even once we get up to the fifth harmonic there, look, it falls right in between C and C sharp. Same with the seventh, right? The seventh harmonic here. These are the odd order harmonics. It's going to fall right in between the note again. So, this is a lot of times, this is why you see, I always use electric guitar as the example here. It's always the best representation of it, where we see a guitar being played into a severely overdriven circuit, and it's going to create odd order or even order harmonics, depending on what kind of amp design it is, right? And in this situation, you can see if there was a lot of odd order harmonic in this amplifier, that F, or I'm sorry, that A that you play, just even that single note A, would have harmonics generated with it that would make it feel out of tune, right? Whereas all the even order harmonics are mathematically supportive of that A. They're all in the right mathematic framework to work there. And as a guitar player, I can tell you, any guitar players out there would probably back me up on this. When you're playing really distorted chords, be it solid state or tube, but I will stick in solid state here. The more complex the chord, the more out of tune it sounds. That's why you see, a lot of metal, right, is root and the fifth. And think interval there, not harmonic, right? And they'll keep the odd intervals out of it, right? Because it just goes to mush when you do that. Here's maybe a little better example of it. So let's take a simple A chord, right, which is a root, third, and a fifth. It's going to be A, C sharp, E, right? We know that one well. All right, so here's the deal, though. If as you start to distort that, we saw what happens to the root, which is okay. But as we start to distort it, we'll look at what happens above the third, right? When we get to the odd harmonic there, it actually creates a major seventh above the third. And on the fifth, remember interval now, not harmonic, once we start generating the odd harmonics on that, the third harmonic above that note is a ninth. And it gets worse as you keep going up, right? So your sound just turns to mush really, really quickly, let alone that it can kind of sound out of tune. All right, so you want to be prudent with this when you're using it in music, for sure. And for you guys that are guitar players, this is kind of why tube amps have a tendency to sound better. We think of them as sounding better instead of solid state amps for distorted guitar, right? It's all around this. This is the way Jurgen explained it to me, by the way, which was a really cool way to do it. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. All right, so the next piece here we're going to do is talk about analog emulation for digital and the challenge. Remember I said earlier that the preamp, right, is really the only analog piece of circuitry that we have in a digital console. So it's really our only place to generate organic harmonic information, right? So let's take a look at the challenges of this. So if we have a preamp and we move it out of its, or just in its normal state, it produces beautiful sine wave, harmonic, low harmonics in it, very low level harmonics in it, really good, clean signal. And if we do the same thing on a digital preamp, exactly the same thing. I kind of cringe every time I even say digital preamp, but I want you to understand it's the preamp, the analog preamp that's in a digital console, right? So that's what we're looking at right here. So what happens if we want to take the analog pre, past linearity? We want to create some overdrive with it in order to create some harmonic information. Well, we can do that very easily, really with no penalty other than the distortion itself, which we may actually want as part of the sound. But if we do that in digital, look at what happens here. You have to remember we're correlated to an A to D converter here, right? Which has an absolute ceiling in it. So as we start to keep turning up the preamp on the digital console, we risk generating overs in the A to D converter because they're correlated. We have no way to offset that. And we do this in the studio all the time. Like if we have a preamp that we're going to overdrive a little bit to get some crunch or some life out of it, so to speak, we have the ability on a lot of preamps to actually turn it down. I'm going to give you an example of one today here. Actually, let me get this turned on. So this is what I'm going to show you today. This is a preamp out of the studio here. It's kind of a Neve copy. It's a Heritage 73 JR, but notice it has an input gain, but it also has an output level, and that would drive into the converter. So given this, you can actually take and create some harmonic information in that preamp and then turn it back down to keep it within the bounds of the converter. All right, so let's see if we can get this over here. I'm going to let you see this a little bit here. At least I'm hoping to. All right, so we're going to look at this in spectrum. All right, this is kind of a way to see this. The purple signal you see there, let me see if I can turn it off there. We just want to look at noise here. All right, so I'm assuming you guys can see that okay? Yeah. So let's just annotate what we're seeing here just for a second. All right, so what you see here are harmonics that organically exist in this pre, right? Oops. Actually, I'll just let that go there. So second harmonic, third harmonic, right? So it's got a little bit of both happening in there. This is a 1K tone, 2K harmonic, 3K harmonic. Okay? So the idea would be, well, how do we turn this signal up and get more harmonics happening on it? And remember, you have to keep in context here. This is one frequency that we're creating here. It's not a full bandwidth frequency. So, this is not, I hate to say this, I'll give you the disclaimer here. This is not laboratory science we are doing here today. This is not laboratory measurements. I'm just trying to come up with a way to demonstrate this to you, okay? So let's do this. So this is the preamp that I was just showing you, and that is the signal. Now, I'm also going to warn you, this makes my smart system go a little bit crazy at times, so just be prepared here. It might just go a little wonky, and we have to wait it out. So I'm going to start adding some gain here. And you can notice we got tons of harmonic content that is in there now. But look how high the signal is into the converter there now, right? So, you would never get away with running this much gain on a drum or anything that has any kind of transient information. It would be creating overs all over the place. But on this particular preamp, we can actually turn the output down and get it back in line there, right? so we can get it back into a better frame place, or a better place where we can control it, right? Is that making sense to everybody? Let's see. There we go. Get some harmonics in there. Okay, but you know, the challenge in digital is that we don't have the ability to do this. We don't have the ability to turn it down in the, you know, an output stage in the preamp before it hits the converter. Those two things are correlated, right? So it's much more challenging to do there, and typically we will rely on emulation to do that. Okay, so let me get back to this, I believe. Right, is that making sense to you guys? Fred, you got your hand up there, bud.
I just had a couple questions. So, first of all, if you clip the S6L, does it clip or does it mute if you run out of math?
Well, it depends on which half of the circuitry you're clipping or muting. So if you
clip the input gain and you clip the digital signal, does it mute or does it clip?
You asked me two different things there. So there's a preamp that is an analog circuit. If I overdrive that preamp, then it's distorting and saturating. If that resultant signal takes the A to D converter past digital 0, now it's muting.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. So they are correlated, but that said, you could you could certainly probably overdrive that preamp and get it to sound awful before you get it to distort. You know, if it was a signal that didn't have very much transient to it, you know, you could definitely do that.
So that gain that you were doing there, you were doing that in this external piece of equipment. You were not doing that on the console.
That's correct. Yeah, and it's to demonstrate that we don't have that additional output stage in the preamp on S6L. Actually, none of the digital consoles have that. And I honestly, I think it's a good thing right now, certainly right now, because, I mean, let's be honest, we have a whole lot of people that are having trouble setting gain structure now. You know, let's not add another gain stage, you know, pre-conversion. Right?
Didn't the Oxford do that, though?
Oxford's not a live sound console.
No, I understand that, but it's an analog console controlled digitally, right?
I don't know for certain. If anybody's got any intel on that, I'll take it. But I don't know for certain.
The Oxford didn't have that ability. Okay. I worked in an Oxford for many years, and it did not have that ability.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being. Yeah.
That there's a number of processes that came after the Oxford where it was taken out of context that were not part of the workflow in the console itself. The only things that you could see out there that were part, obviously the compressor, the limiter, the inflator was something that came out in the later revisions of it.
Yeah.
But not much else beyond that. All those other plugins are sold under the Oxford moniker, not really.
Yeah, and we're going to cover, we'll definitely cover inflator today when we get to the examples. So, okay, so let's carry on here. So all of this said, to kind of highlight, if you want to try to get preamp, you know, harmonics and saturation happening, your best way to do it in digital, sans this way of doing it, is to use a plugin, right? And that's kind of the approach we've taken at Avid for sure, is that we want to create the absolute cleanest preamp we can possibly create that is void of harmonic information for the most part. We kind of subscribe to the uber clean model there so that you have a better chance of emulating downstream. And that plugin that you see right there is really one of my mainstays to do that. I use it as a plugin, or a preamp emulator, I should say, to do that very thing. So, and you can get a very, very believable result with this. Hopefully you're going to hear that today. I'm going to try to have a bunch of audio examples for you here today. The next piece of the path is, honestly, tape compression. You know, that's what we want to do next. And, you know, we can do that. Like if we were in the studio doing that, we would come from that path, maybe through other equipment that had more harmonic content in it. But at some point it would end up at the tape machine, and it's a big piece of the sound. And then finally, transformers are another big piece of it as well. You know, if we want to have transformer emulation in consoles, I don't know of any plugins that are compatible with S6L that will emulate transformer. I know there are some in AAX native land that can do it. But as you guys might have seen at some of my demos and stuff, I use some actual transformers in my output section to drive off of the console. Actually, insert some Western Electric transformers there for that very reason. So, but again, the point of it is it's little bits of addition in this harmonic game. And I saw a couple of posts over the weekend. I can't remember who it was from. I wouldn't call him out anyway, but he was saying that he's been taking in all of this information from my sessions and Pooch's sessions and everything, and trying to apply all of it onto the console just out of the box and trying to make it go. And it was just a mess for him. I would tell you all the work that we're going to talk about today. This is a nuanced game. This is totally a nuanced game where lots of little bits of it add up to a big difference. If you're trying to just do a one-trick pony where I'm going to take that input and saturate it and that's going to be my analog sound, I'll go out on the limb and say you're probably going to end up disappointed, and it's really, really easy to overdo all of this on digital consoles. You got to be really disciplined with it. Otherwise, it can get out of hand really quickly, and you just kind of scratch your head at some point and go, what is going on here?